crazy conspiracy theories that were actually true. For decades, these ideas were dismissed as paranoia. People were mocked, censored, and labeled conspiracy theorists for believing them. But years later, governments and corporations were forced to release documents, hold congressional hearings, issue public apologies, and admit the truth. These aren't rumors pulled from internet forums. These aren't fringe theories with no evidence. These are 5 conspiracy theories that actually came true, with real dates, real documents, real victims, and consequences that are still felt today. The pattern is always the same: deny, deflect, discredit, until you can't anymore. So let's dig into the archives and look at what really happened. Number 5. Government mass surveillance. The idea that governments were secretly spying on their own citizens used to sound extreme. It was the kind of thing you'd hear in dystopian novels or late-night radio shows. For years, officials insisted surveillance only targeted criminals or foreign threats. We don't spy on Americans, they'd say. We have oversight, we have checks and balances. Anyone who suggested otherwise was written off as paranoid. That all changed in June 2013. That's when former intelligence contractor Edward Snowden, a 29-year-old NSA analyst, leaked thousands of classified documents to journalists Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. Those documents revealed global surveillance programs run by the National Security Agency, including PRISM, X-Keyscore, and Tempora. These weren't small operations. These were industrial-scale data collection systems. They pulled in phone records, emails, video calls, internet searches, text messages, and location data, often without individual warrants. One leaked court order showed that Verizon was required to hand over daily phone metadata for every single customer, millions of people, regardless of suspicion or probable cause. This wasn't targeted surveillance, this was bulk collection. The scope was staggering. Even allied nations were being monitored. The phones of world leaders, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel, were being tapped. Entire populations were swept into massive databases, stored indefinitely, searchable at will. The NSA had built backdoors into tech companies. They had tapped undersea fiber optic cables. They had partnered with intelligence agencies in the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, a group known as the Five Eyes, to share surveillance data and circumvent domestic laws. When questioned during a Senate hearing in March 2013, just months before Snowden's leaks, NSA Director James Clapper was asked directly, "Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions of Americans?" His answer, "No, sir, not wittingly." That statement was later proven to be false. When the Snowden documents went public, intelligence officials scrambled. They admitted that much of the data collection happened first, and filtering happened later. In other words, collect everything. Ask questions never. The conspiracy wasn't that surveillance existed. Everyone knew some level of monitoring was happening. The conspiracy was how much, how long, and how quietly it had already been happening. With no real public debate, no informed consent, and minimal accountability. Crazy fact. Some surveillance programs were so classified that even members of Congress, the people supposed to provide oversight, later said they had never been fully briefed on their scope. Senator Ron Wyden called it secret law, where the government's interpretation of its own powers was itself classified. To this day, many of the programs revealed by Snowden are still active. Number 4. Big Tobacco hid the truth. In the early 1950s, medical studies began linking cigarette smoking to lung cancer. Doctors started noticing patterns. Patients who smoked heavily were dying at alarming rates from diseases that were once rare. Publicly, tobacco companies denied the connection. They ran full-page ads in newspapers with headlines like, "More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette." They sponsored television shows, sports teams, even children's cartoons. Smoking was portrayed as glamorous, sophisticated, healthy, but privately, their own scientists confirmed the opposite. Internal research, buried deep inside company archives, showed that nicotine was addictive and cigarettes caused cancer, heart disease, emphysema, and respiratory failure. They knew, and instead of warning the public, they made a choice. In 1953, the major tobacco companies met secretly and coordinated a strategy to create doubt. They funded fake research groups with names like the Tobacco Industry Research Committee and the Council for Tobacco Research. These groups weren't looking for truth, they were manufacturing confusion. They hired public relations firms like Hill and Knowlton to craft messaging. They attacked scientists who spoke out, calling them biased or alarmist. They published studies designed to muddy the waters, planting just enough doubt to keep people smoking. A 1963 internal memo from Brown and Williamson, one of the largest tobacco companies, famously stated, "Nicotine is addictive. We are then in the business of selling addiction." Despite this, despite knowing full well what their product did, in 1994, 7 major tobacco executives were called before the US Congress. One by one, they raised their right hands and testified under oath. Each one said the same thing. "I believe nicotine is not addictive. It was theater. It was perjury in plain sight." That testimony later collapsed when millions of internal documents were released during state lawsuits in the late 1990s, known as the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement. The documents were damning. Emails, memos, research reports, all showing the industry had known for decades. It became clear they had not only hidden the dangers, but had engineered cigarettes to maximize addiction, especially among young smokers. They manipulated nicotine levels. They added chemicals to make smoke easier to inhale. They designed marketing campaigns specifically targeting teenagers, using cartoon characters and sponsoring youth-focused events. Crazy fact: some tobacco companies destroyed entire research departments overnight once investigations began. Entire filing cabinets were incinerated. Scientists were told to stop documenting their findings. Some were reassigned, others were paid to stay quiet. The cover-up was as deliberate as the product itself, and the human cost? Millions dead, families destroyed, entire generations addicted, all while the executives testified under oath that they saw no problem. Number 3. MKUltra, mind control experiments. This conspiracy sounds like science fiction, like something out of a spy thriller or a horror movie, but it was real. In 1953, during the height of the Cold War, the CIA launched Project MKUltra. The Cold War wasn't just a battle of weapons and borders. It was a psychological war. And the CIA believed the enemy was developing techniques to control the human mind. They were terrified of being left behind, so they launched their own program. Its goal was to explore mind control, interrogation techniques, chemical manipulation, and psychological warfare. Over the next 2 decades, 149 sub-projects were conducted under the MKUltra umbrella. Experiments were carried out using LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, barbiturates, amphetamines, hypnosis, electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, and prolonged isolation. Many subjects never consented. Some were prisoners, others were psychiatric patients in hospitals told they were receiving treatment. Some were ordinary civilians, people visiting brothels or bars, unknowingly drugged in CIA-run safe houses, then observed behind one-way mirrors while under the influence of powerful hallucinogens. In one infamous operation, called Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA hired prostitutes to lure men to secret apartments in San Francisco and New York. The men were dosed with LSD without their knowledge. Then CIA agents watched from behind mirrors, documenting their reactions, their breakdowns, their terror. In several cases, subjects experienced permanent psychological damage. Some never recovered. At least one died. Frank Olson was a CIA biochemist who worked on classified projects. In November 1953, during a work retreat, he was secretly given LSD by his colleagues. Days later, he fell from a 10th-story hotel window in New York City. His death was ruled a suicide. His family was told nothing about the LSD. It wasn't until 1975, more than 20 years later, that the truth came out. By then, his body had been buried. His family had lived with unanswered questions for decades. In 1973, as investigations into CIA activities began heating up, director Richard Helms ordered most MKUltra records destroyed, shredded, burned, gone. What survived was only uncovered because of a filing error, documents that had been mislabeled and escaped destruction. Those files were revealed during the Church Committee hearings in 1975, a US Senate investigation into intelligence abuses. The public was shocked. Officials testified before Congress and admitted the full scope of MKUltra would never be known because most of the evidence no longer existed. Crazy fact. One MKUltra contractor, Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, conducted experiments at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. He used electroshock therapy at levels 30 to 40 times more powerful than standard treatment. Combined with drug-induced comas and repetitive audio loops played for weeks, his goal was to erase patients' minds and rebuild them. Some victims lost all memory of their identities. Families were destroyed. Canada eventually paid settlements to survivors. The program officially ended in 1973, but the damage and the questions remain. Number 2. The Tuskegee Syphilis experiment. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service began a medical study in Tuskegee, Alabama. The official name was Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. Nearly 600 black men were enrolled. Of those, 399 had syphilis. Many were poor sharecroppers, many were illiterate, and most were never given informed consent. They were told they were receiving free health care for bad blood, a vague term used to describe various ailments. In reality, they were being observed, not treated, whilst suffering from syphilis. The purpose was to document the natural progression of the disease, to watch what happened when it went untreated, to study it until death. At first, this might have seemed like a legitimate, if ethically questionable, observational study. But then, in 1947, everything changed. Penicillin became the widely accepted cure for syphilis. It was cheap, it was effective, it saved lives. But the doctors running the Tuskegee study made a choice. They deliberately withheld treatment. They didn't just fail to provide penicillin. They actively prevented the men from receiving it. When participants tried to enlist in World War II and were offered treatment by the military, the Public Health Service intervened to keep them out of the treatment programs. When penicillin became standard care across the country, these men were excluded. The experiment continued for 40 years. Even as medical ethics standards were being rewritten worldwide in response to the horrors of Nazi experimentation, families were never informed. Wives contracted syphilis from their husbands. Children were born with congenital syphilis, suffering from deformities, blindness, and developmental issues. And all the while, doctors published research papers. They presented at medical conferences. They built careers on this data. The study only ended in 1972 after a whistleblower. Peter Buxton, a public health service investigator, exposed it to journalist Jean Heller of the Associated Press. The story broke nationwide. The outrage was immediate. The government couldn't deny it. An advisory panel was formed. The study was shut down. But by then, 28 men had died directly from syphilis. Another 100 died from related complications. 40 wives had been infected, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. In 1997, 25 years after the study ended, President Bill Clinton formally apologized on behalf of the US government. 5 of the 8 remaining survivors attended the White House ceremony. Crazy fact, doctors involved in the study continued publishing research papers about their findings long after the experiment was publicly known to be unethical. Some defended their work even in interviews decades later, claiming it had provided valuable medical data. The moral blindness was as shocking as the study itself. The Tuskegee experiment didn't just harm its victims, it shattered trust in medical institutions within black communities, a wound that still affects public health efforts today. Number 1. COINTELPRO, Government Infiltration and Disruption. In 1956, the FBI launched a covert domestic operation called COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program. Its stated purpose was to monitor, infiltrate, and neutralize threats to national security. But the real targets weren't foreign spies or terrorists. They were American citizens, civil rights groups, anti-war activists, feminist organizations, black nationalist movements, socialist groups, environmental activists, journalists, professors, even members of Congress. Anyone deemed politically inconvenient was fair game. The tactics were chilling. FBI agents forged letters to create distrust between allies. They spread false rumors to destroy reputations. They planted informants inside organizations, sometimes in leadership positions, to steer groups toward violence or collapse. They sent anonymous threats. They leaked information to the press to discredit activists. They encouraged violent confrontations by pitting groups against each other. One infamous case involved the Black Panther Party. The FBI sent a forged letter to a rival gang, falsely claiming the Panthers were planning an attack. The result, a shootout that left multiple people dead. Another case involved actress Jean Seberg, who supported civil rights causes. The FBI spread a false rumor that she was pregnant by a Black Panther member. The story was planted in newspapers. She suffered a miscarriage. Years later, she died by suicide, struggling with the trauma of the smear campaign. COINTELPRO wasn't about preventing crime. It was about disrupting dissent. Entire movements collapsed from paranoia and distrust created from within, and no one knew the FBI was behind it. The program remained a total secret until March 8, 1971, when a group of activists calling themselves the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania. It was a small office, poorly secured, and on that night, most FBI agents were distracted, watching the televised Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier fight, known as the Fight of the Century. The activists stole over 1,000 classified files. They carefully reviewed the documents, then sent copies to journalists at major newspapers, including the Washington Post and the New York Times. The word COINTELPRO appeared in the files. The documents detailed surveillance, infiltration, and sabotage of domestic political groups. The FBI did not deny their authenticity. They tried to stop publication, but the papers ran the story anyway. The fallout was massive. Congressional hearings were held. COINTELPRO was quietly shut down in April 1971, but the damage was already done. Movements had been dismantled, lives had been ruined. Trust in government institutions was shattered. Crazy fact, the activists who broke into the FBI office were never caught. They remained anonymous for 43 years, until 2014, when some of them voluntarily revealed their identities in interviews and a documentary called 1971. By then, the statute of limitations had long passed. They walked free. The FBI never even came close to finding them. COINTELPRO wasn't a rogue operation. It was approved at the highest levels. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover personally signed off on tactics. Memos were sent, approvals were given, careers were built on it, and for 15 years, no one knew. Conclusion: these weren't conspiracy theories, they were conspiracies, and they were real. What makes them so disturbing isn't just what happened, it's the pattern. Deny, dismiss, discredit, until the evidence becomes impossible to ignore, until whistleblowers risk everything, until documents are leaked or subpoenaed, until survivors demand justice. And even then, the truth comes out decades too late. History shows that the truth often surfaces, just not in time to stop the harm. So the question isn't whether conspiracies exist. The question is, which ones are happening right now? Which denials will age like milk? Which classified programs will be exposed in 20 years? Which victims are being told they're paranoid today, only to be proven right tomorrow? If you want part 2, subscribe, because some conspiracies are still classified, some whistleblowers are still in hiding, and some truths still haven't surfaced. But history tells us they will, eventually.